You are listening to the World Sports Show on WPPMLP Philadelphia. Soccer-based sports talk covering local, nation, and global soccer. Broadcasting from the Philly Cam studio in Center City, Philadelphia on 106.5 FM.
Show tonight is Abby Erceg. I want to thank you joining from the show. Abby, how are things in Utah?
Good so far, obviously, with the start that we've had. We're really happy to be here, happy to be playing. It's good.
It's obviously a different kind of world, and you guys had a lot more off time than obviously anybody planned, but it seems so far in the Challenge Cup, you guys have come right in and just picked up right where you left off in the championship game last year.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of always the objective of any team. You don't kind of want to dip too far below the standard that you left off the season before. So I think we've done a good job of that, picking it up straight away. But it has been tough. You know, the preseason was a little bit shorter than usual, obviously with some of the restrictions around, being go out and socialize and things like that. That was tough as well. But, yeah, I think the team's done a great job so far, and I think the results kind of show that.
And obviously a different kind of world that we're in, where there's a lot of like self-reliance on players to keep themselves in shape and keep their touch. There's only limited things you can do with like a roommate or by yourself. How's that, changed you as a player about how you approach your fitness and your first touch type things?
Yeah, it was a little bit different for me because typically I don't spend a lot of time with the ball in the off season. It's all really fitness based. And then having to go in, by yourself and really figure out how you can get that touch back, it was tough. It was really tough. My roommate was injured for a lot of the time, and we were only allowed to train with our roommate. So I was by myself, and I had to find ways with benches and with a wall, adapting some of the drills that we got from Paul to make sure that I could fit in the work that we needed to get done. But I think at the end of the day, it was just coming down to being out there, getting a touch on the ball again, getting a feel. Because, when you're not going to forget how to play. It's just a matter of, spending time with the ball and getting familiar again.
Yeah, how was that like when you first kind of strap on the boots and you're getting in small-sided stuff? Was it seem fast, or did it just all come back to you naturally?
Yeah, I think for the most part, we were just so excited just to be back and playing and back in groups. You kind of forgot about, trying to play well and having a good touch. I think everyone was just happy to be there and having a good time and just enjoying each other's company. And it wasn't really until maybe a week or two later that we were like, okay, that's kind of wearing off. We need to start focusing on, tactics and making sure our touch is good. So once the nostalgia of that and being back with the team kind of wore off, it was back to business.
Yeah, you said you were just glad to see your teammates. This has kind of brought us back to like the grassroots of why we all either coach or play this game, just the pure love of it. You don't realize how much you miss something when you're not allowed to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So there was like good sides and bad sides to it. Obviously, not being able to see everyone really did suck. And Paul actually said to me he was really surprised that we hadn't been hanging out or, hanging out with the team. But I think because we wanted this tournament to happen and we wanted to play, everybody took it really seriously. And we isolated and made sure that we followed all the protocols that were set up on us. So we were just beyond excited when we got to hang out with each other again.
And I'm sure that, that Paul Riley is just a student of game. I'm sure being under him is a pleasure. There's always something to learn from Paul. And what was the learning experience kind of like with you when you're in this whole, bubble state where you're just having to get sent stuff, almost emailed to you, all your different stuff?
Yeah, I think what Paul's done really well is he's set a standard in our culture that we don't fall below. And I think that's evident throughout the way that we play and obviously throughout success throughout the past 2 or 3 years. And it was no different for this. When Paul's sending things through, I think the standard was that you go out and do it no matter what, rain, hail, shine. Everybody was out there doing their work, and you could, we're obviously split up, but you could see other people on different fields doing their work and making sure that it was getting done no matter what the weather. And that for me was quite inspirational because you do question it sometimes, when times do get tough. That's kind of when you fall back on the culture and you're wondering if players are going to do, these drills that Paul is sending through, because it's optional at that point. You don't have to do it. But the fact that everybody was doing it, I think for me was such a huge learning curve, and that the culture really drives our performance and really drives the standards of what we're trying to achieve every year. And preseason was the time that I saw that really shine through.
You talk about the culture down in Carolina. It's evident with you guys winning multiple championships and just all the momentum you guys brought down from, New York down to Carolina. What has it been like when you have different goalkeepers behind you, different defenders? You guys have been doing such a great job of, I think, plugging players in and out, and the level doesn't drop. You guys are just playing this really good system football.
I think that's the benefit of the culture and having those standards, is that no matter who's in or who's out, who's new, who's a veteran, you have to reach those standards. That's just how it is. And if you don't, you don't play. So I think, again, Paul's just done a really good job of solidifying that. And then I think over the years, the players have kind of taken over, and we now hold each other accountable. Whereas in the first year or two, it was probably Paul doing most of the, you've got to do better here and you've got to do better here. Whereas now it's, I think he's developed a lot of really solid players. You look at Sam, myself, Lynn Williams, those players are the ones that are holding other people accountable. And it just flows through the team. When you've got an entire team that's holding those standards and holding each other accountable, it's a lot easier just for one or two players to plug in and come up to those standards. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys seem to be, when you're drafting new rookies and new players come in, whether you sign them, they're like a free agent type things. It seems that there's probably some, what we call growing pains, but it seems a lot of them are just kind of fitting right in.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of adapt or die, really. If you don't fit in, you're just going to kind of fall by the wayside. And I think now when players are coming in, we're getting a bit of a reputation for our preseason, how hard it is, how high the standards are. And players are actually coming in prepared now, rather than waiting to see what it's like, seeing if they're going to survive. It's more about, I know the courage is tough. I want to be part of one of the best teams in the league. I need to make sure that I come in fit and I come in ready to go. Because we've seen some really phenomenal players kind of just fall by the wayside because they didn't take it seriously enough. They didn't, follow the standards, and they got left behind.
So there was some really big news that came out, within the past week and a half, with New Zealand and Australia being announced as the, co-host of the next Women's World Cup that'll be down in, like New Zealand, Australia. What was that news like, and where were you, and how did you find out?
I was actually at training when I found out. So I was in the middle of training. I knew it was coming out. So the first thing I did was I checked my phone when training had finished. But for me, it's huge. I have never played in a World Cup at home. We barely play any games at home internationally. So for us to have that entire tournament is really big. Soccer isn't the biggest sport in New Zealand for men or women. We've got rugby and we've got things like netball as well. So to get that recognition, first and foremost, is huge for the sport. I think it's going to help us grow, help us build a bit more of a foundation, and get a bit more recognition for the work that both the men's and women's teams do, but obviously in this instance, the women's team. So pure excitement is probably the first emotion that I felt. And then just a little bit of relief. You work so hard trying to get a little bit of recognition. You work so hard making sure that the standards are right for the girls and the women coming through. So there's a bit of relief at the end of it, in that all that hard work has been for something rather than, in vain.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see a Women's World Cup down in New Zealand, down in Australia. And I think the one thing that'll probably be such a great benefit for your country is for them to be able to watch a World Cup where they don't got to wake up at 4 a.m. I'm sure that's crossed your mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the downsides of not being able to play games at home. We just, the fan base kind of falls away a little bit, especially if you're playing across the other side of the world. People have to wake up at 4 a.m. to watch the games, and it's great for family and friends because obviously they're going to do it. But when you're trying to build a fan base and build a foundation for the sport, that becomes really difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably already gotten hit up by family you didn't know you had asking for tickets already.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, we talk about a lot of those landscapes of New Zealand, Australia, and USA are very similar, where in America, one of our first sports is, American football. And down there, the All Blacks are like idols. They walk on gold. I mean, it's going to change a little bit with this Women's World Cup. I mean, you're going to be a player that's really going to start getting recognized on the street, and people are going to start really looking up to you. I mean, have you started thinking about how much of a spotlight you guys are going to be on in the 3 years leading up to?
Yeah, and that's great because, I was one of those kids that didn't have soccer role models growing up. And if I did, they were all overseas-based players. You've got your Mia Hamm and your other great players in the American team. So for us, that's great, but we kind of had to go through a phase where we had a generation that kind of sacrificed everything for this to happen. So a lot of the hard work that happened was the generation before me, and you're not going to hear those names. You're going to hear the names of the players coming through, which is great. I think that's phenomenal. But again, it's just a little bit of that relief that I was talking about earlier, where there's been so much hard work behind the scenes of these players that didn't have role models, and of these players that really wanted these role models, to make sure that the game had a future. And I think that this World Cup is really going to solidify that future for the sport.
No, I wish you guys the best of luck. And I mean, you've been a household name on the international level for years, and you guys really deserve this. And I think it's going to be a really well-attended World Cup, because it's a spot on the map that everybody in America says, "Oh, I want to go to New Zealand. I want to go to New Zealand." You know, go just to go there to check it out. I mean, I think that it's really going to raise a popularity in your sport, and you hope you get that, you know, years and years of positive that carries over to the youth program.
Yeah, and I think that's a secondary goal, is making sure that, yes, we do have the World Cup and it's going to be great at the time, but how can we use that to make sure that in the future football is going to continue to grow, and how can we use this World Cup to make sure that happens?
Well, Abby, I want to thank you for coming into World Sports Show, and wish you guys all the best luck and safeness in Utah, and keep doing what you're doing. Appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Charlie.
You are listening to the World Sports Show on WPPMLP Philadelphia. Soccer-based sports talk covering local, nation, and global soccer. Broadcasting from the Philly Cam studio in Center City, Philadelphia on 106.5 FM.
This is Charlie Flowe, World Sports Show. Joining me on the show tonight is Paul Riley, head coach of North Carolina Courage. Paul, thank you for joining the show. How's everything going down in Utah?
Yeah, it's been great so far. Well organized, safe environment. Obviously, we're in the bubble, in the athlete village. So it's been really good, to be honest with you. And they're taking good care of us, and all the expectations have probably been lived up to, and maybe above that. So yeah, I want to thank everyone, NWSL, and all the people in Utah that made it possible. It's been fantastic, and obviously everyone's pleased that we could do something, and obviously be the first sport to get back on the field and playing. And there've been some good games so far. So yeah, so far so good. Looking forward to the next couple of weeks and pushing on. And you know, I think the main thing is the protocols to keep everybody safe, and they've been really good. And the 4 teams in our hotel, we're in a little bubble, to say the least, and we're doing the best we can in that bubble to make sure that, you know, we all stay in that bubble. So it's been really good so far, and it's nice to see everybody around too and have conversations with them and talk about football a lot, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are one of the centerpieces of the first professional sport in the United States to get underway, first team sport, and you know, you have a lot of eyes on you guys, and I think that there's all of us going into this tournament wondering, well, what's the level of play going to be like? You know, I mean, that probably crossed your mind is you can only do so much scrimmaging. You really didn't have any of those preseason type of games to prepare yourself against like university teams in Carolina. It was just go from the beginning. You only got a few bit of training sessions. And what was that mindset like as a coach, knowing you didn't have a lot of preparation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's no coaching book for the pandemic. You know, nobody's ever written a book about the pandemic, maybe from this point onwards. But yeah, it's been difficult. Plus training, obviously we started individual training, then to group training, and then to full team training. So full team training, obviously you have to go through the tactical end of it. And the good thing for us is we're bringing so many players back. We're bringing 17 back from the squad from last year. So for us, it's almost like a recap, or just going over things again, you know, that we've already been over several years. So then that's a good part for us. The negative is, like you said, there's no preseason scrimmages. So you have no scrimmages, you have no games. There's not that intensity of a game, so you don't feel like soreness after a game. You can't manage the 90 minutes if you're Sam Ewis, because you haven't had those 90 minutes. And for some players, it's been 8 months. For other players like Sam, it's been 3-4 months. But even 3-4 months is a long time without a 90-minute football game. So it has been difficult. But the players, the good thing is we're here for a long time. We had a tricky first week where we had 3 games. But I think now that we've settled in, it's been good. And we've got a week to prepare for next week for Sky Blue on Monday. So it's a good long time to get everything efficient. And there's so much to work on. And the thing is, you don't want to, you know, analyze to paralyze. You just got to make sure that you cover things that you need to cover without overdoing it, and making sure the players have their free time, making sure they have recovery time, making sure they do get video time, whether it be individual, group, or team. And then obviously the most important part for me is the training time. And they've been tremendous in practice the last 3-4 weeks in preparation. And I think we're not at our best yet, but I feel like we're simmering nicely. You know, I feel like we can get better. we've talked about a lot of things even in our meeting this morning that we think we can improve, and I think they all think they can play a little bit better. Again, if it's 1% in 7 different categories, it's 7% better, right? So I think the incremental improvement, but that's what we're looking for from each game as we go through the tournament. And we've had some good matchups. Obviously, our group was pretty tricky with Washington, Chicago, and Portland, but I wouldn't want it any other way. They put their best foot forward against us, their best lineups out against us, and it's a really good test for us. Chicago was a tough test for us the other night. They came high pressing first half, and then the good thing is you got to be able to high press for 90 minutes if you're going to do it. And they backed off a little bit second half. We were able to get a grip of the game and work our way into the game. But they're a good side. There's a lot of good teams in the tournament. It just takes one off day, and you have your one off day, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean it's also a different style of football. We got to see it with the European leagues kicking off a few weeks before you guys, of having the 5 substitutes, having the 30th minute and 75th minute water break. I mean, it changes how you coach. It's almost that like free timeout where you can bring your players in and chat with them. I mean, that's probably been a little almost like coaching club soccer where we have those kind of built-in timeouts and multiple subs.
Yeah, it's true. And to be honest with you, I think that plus the fact that we're all together the whole time. I mean, it's a lot different from being back in Raleigh when you're coaching. They have training in the morning, we have a meeting, and then they go and do different things, obviously, in the afternoon, whether it be cryotherapy, massage, or whatever. Inside the game, we have these breaks, and the breaks can hurt you or help you depending on what situation you're in the game. I don't particularly like them, but I certainly think the game at the weekend against Chicago helped us. I think the one in the second half, we were able to talk about a couple of things, a couple of tweaks, and we thought that we could make. Talk about corner kicks, maybe the goal came from a set piece, so you can maybe plan a set piece and stuff like that maybe you haven't talked about, or maybe just add one to what you've given them prior to the game starting. So from that end of it's good, but momentum-wise, we've been up in a couple of the games and we've been in fucking great position, and all of a sudden the drinks come and we get back. It takes us another 5 minutes to get going again. So it is a difficult time, but the players are getting used to it now. I think, again, it's just something different. And, we're not used to any of this, We're seeing the same teams in the elevator, the same players in the lobby from other teams. You're talking about the games with other coaches. I mean, I see Rory every day. I see Richie every day, and I see Mark every day. And we talk soccer. We talk about the other teams that aren't in the conversation, so to speak. So you learn a lot. I mean, you keep your ears open, and it's great to talk football, as you know. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot different, but it's been great even having your staff around. We're not used to having all the staff around. The staff leave at 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I stay at the stadium until 5, 6 o'clock. They're all gone by 1 or 2 o'clock, and it's different to have them all around all the time. You throw things off each other a little bit more. There's a little bit more put to the scout. There's a little bit more time to do the recap. There's a little bit more time to do individual videos. So we're definitely spending the time trying to improve players, and obviously it's a short turnaround, but if every player can improve it, then it's well worth the journey, whether we win or not. So that's the plan, and we'll keep going to it. Hopefully we'll get some success as we go and get a little bit better as we go.
Yeah, another big thing I've noticed is some of your changing your lineups and some of your players. That the big thing we talk about in the football world is load management. I'm sure that's very key on your mind, is managing the load, but still being able to put a competitive roster and get a win.
Yeah, it's not easy telling Sam Lewis you can't play every minute of every game, or Crystal Dunn you can't play every minute of every game. But it's good. I mean, it is good. The good thing is tournaments always bring up new players right to the league, and Laura Millet has been fantastic for us. Had a start and come into two games most of the second half, and she's been really productive, creative. And a year ago, if you'd have asked me, she asked me if she'll ever get into that 18, I would have said, I don't know, but now she's knocking on the door, starting in the lineup and pushing Crystal and Dabinia, which is some feat in itself, to be honest with you. But she's done really well, and she comes from Colorado College, and they must be really happy to see her playing. But there's a player that, if we missed this year, she would miss this opportunity, and she got this opportunity. Addie Merrick, who's the right back too, who's 28 draft pick. She's another one that wouldn't have gotten an opportunity. She's playing starting right back for us right now. And so I always feel like these tournaments always bring out 2 or 3 players that you just never thought would be the player they are. And it's fantastic for the club. And it makes it easier preparation for next year. Imagine missing this year out and having nothing. And then you're trying to see what these players are like, giving them contracts and stuff like that. So I think also for the players like Sam Lewis and Abby Dalcamper and the national team players now, how you can't, at 27 years of age, you can't miss a year of your career. You have to play games. You have to train at a high level. And that's why I'm making every day as intense as it would be normally. I don't want it to be, we're here for a long time and let's just play soccer tennis for a couple of hours. If we're going to do it, let's do it properly, and let's train properly, and let's try and get as much out of this 7 weeks as we possibly can. And that's what we've been going into. Different coaches have gone different ways. Some coaches like Chicago predicted every game and they put different lineups out, but they already predicted their lineups. We've done it really as we've gone along, and with conversation with the players, and obviously performance in mind too. The intensity of practice, our internal benchmarks are high in practice, and I want everybody not to settle to be a sub or settle to be 24 or settle to be number 8. You need to get higher up the pecking order as much as you can, and that requires training at the high level.
So everybody in the world knows you're a massive Liverpool supporter. It's no secret. You're from England, you're from Liverpool. You and I have messaged each other. You've been at some of the biggest, Champions League game in the history of Champions League. I'm sure it was such a tease for you because Liverpool had it in the bag in December. And just to sit there and wait and then finally see it go through official, what's that feeling like for you as a person?
Well, I cried for 12 hours, Charlie. No joke. I watched every video, every clip, everything on Twitter, everything on social media, and I just cried and just, oh my God. But it's funny because I have godchildren who are 27, 24, 18, 12, and none of them have seen Liverpool win the league. So for them to see them win the league, when I was a kid, we used to win it quite often. It was like going to the grocery store almost. We'd win every other year at least. And so I think they won 12 times while I was growing up in the 18 years I lived in England. So it's so amazing for it to happen now. And I think you can see I think the city wants to celebrate it, but we have to be smart. And the night of the game, they definitely went smart. It was crazy in Liverpool the night of the game. But having we waited 30 years for it's fantastic. And they're such a good team, I hope they break all the records because I think they lost a little bit of momentum. When you win it, you're going to lose momentum. There's no question. But I hope they break all the records because it really was a great team. I think some people are kind of forgetting that, wow, what a team this was and what a year they had. And they were almost impeccable. And they lost one game to Watford. Obviously, they lost on a slight hangover last week to Manchester City. But they've been superb this year. And the way they play, if you can imitate that, which we've tried to do at the Courage, you got to, the way they press and the way they counter press. And they're the things that I've always loved about Klopp and his Dortmund team, his Liverpool team. It's an amazing team, an amazing time to be a Liverpool fan. Finally, after all this getting shit from Manchester United fans for all these years, you know what I'm saying, buddy? So it has been fantastic. And I'm just happy for my family because it's been so long since we were able to celebrate it. And my dad will be turning his grave, man, and banging that door to come out because he must be so happy to see the Reds finally winning. We used to go to all the games and he must be singing "You Never Walk Alone" for sure. That's for sure.
Well, Paul, I thank you so much for joining me here on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show and just talk football. I wish you guys greatest success, the rest of the time hitting in Utah and just whatever the season moving forward has. It's always a pleasure. And thank you so much for calling into the show.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to talk to you again, buddy. All the best. Stay safe and your family.
Thank you.
You are listening to the World Sports Show on WPPMLP Philadelphia. Soccer-based sports talk covering local, nation, and global soccer. Broadcasting from the Philly Cam studio in Center City, Philadelphia on 106.5 FM.
This is Charlie Flowe, World Sports Show. I'm joined on the show by Tom Sermanni, head coach of New Zealand women's national team. Tom, thank you for joining me on the show. How are things been with you? Yeah,
a great pleasure, Charlie. Things are, for me, things are reasonably normal apart from not having any soccer. I'm based here in Sydney. So probably since the beginning of the year, I haven't had an opportunity to be over in New Zealand. Our players are scattered all over the world. The girls who are back in New Zealand are back in full training, again, as per normal. But obviously, from my perspective, I'm not able to get over there. So I'm just waiting for the borders to open up.
Yeah, we're definitely in a time and day and age where you and I have to almost coach from afar. We do a lot of communication with our players, and I think that is the benefit of how many different tools and ways that we can communicate with our players versus teleconferencing, email, and just, using a WhatsApp. So that part, I think, has been good as we've been able to keep the communication lines open between our players and coaches.
Yeah, that's definitely been beneficial. The interesting challenge that we have is we try to have a Zoom, every week or every 8 or 9 days. But because we've got players in Iceland, America, England, New Zealand, Australia, it's a challenge to try and actually get everybody where they're actually not sleeping. So that's been interesting, but it is good. You know, the great thing about the modern day world is that at least you can, you know, keep in contact with people and you get, you know, pretty much up to date on where people are at and what they're doing. So that's one big benefit that we've got.
Yeah, I mean, the tools that we have, I mean, I'm sure you've been sending over things to your players, what they can work on, because that's the players are in this new state of the world, and they're relying on us as coaches, as leaders, to say, well, what can I work on, coach? So it's a bit of time for you and me that we have to reinvent ourselves as coaches. We have to find certain things that they can do on an individual level.
Definitely. You know, and one of the big, if you like, any pluses to come out of that, there's a lot of feedback, particularly from our younger players, is that their skill level has improved because they've actually had to go and train individually. And they've actually had to be a little bit more thoughtful. You know, I think one of the things these days, which for old guys like me, we find frustrating, is that, you know, everything for kids from a very, very young age is structured and organised. We're now in a world where that has kind of gone out the window. And players are basically left to their own devices in a whole range of different environments. You know, some might live in an apartment, some might have a huge back garden, some might have a wall to be able to play, you know, kick the ball off of, etc. So it's actually given players, for me, the benefit to actually go away and think and do things and actually make things up. You know, if I go back, as my players are fed up listening to me, tell them about the old days when I'm brought up in Glasgow, where we played in the street from one lamppost to another lamppost, and, you know, around the cars and trying to keep the ball out of people's gardens, etc. And you just made up games, and that kind of thing doesn't happen too much. But this actual situation has sort of reinvented that again, where kids have actually got to go out and got to think up things and do things and take initiative. And I think there's been some great benefits from that.
No, it's neat because we all have these things where we're a young kid on a pitch, and you always see those little stories in movies that are so cliche, with a little kid kicking a ball into a goal at some historic field, and then they have that reliving some glory of some famous goal. I mean, that's what the kids are doing right now, and it kind of takes us back a little bit, like you said, about them just being creative and finding that little bit of space, whether it's even a couple foot by couple foot space in an apartment or something.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, I think that's a really, you know, if there's one positive thing to come out of that is it. You know, and it's interesting, we were talking earlier about when the players are able to come back to training, but they've kind of got to bring their own gear, they've got to bring their own bibs, they've got to bring their own balls and things like that. So they've actually got to do a little bit more thinking for themselves. And for me, like, I'm a big advocate of that because, as I say, I think these days there's so much structure put in place for players and teams when they show up to training and what their expectations are, that it's actually quite good to actually put them outside the comfort zone and to let them take a little bit more initiative.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's created that responsibility of players at all different levels. I mean, we're looking at different rules here in Philadelphia where the players, you know, bring their own balls, bring their own bibs, and it is teaching that responsibility that if you don't show up with your ball or your cleats or your shin guards, you don't get to play. Where, you know, you make sure you have all those things before you get in the car and go to practice. So I think that part is great. And even with teaching the creativity that, hey, I want to pick my player's brain. What is something you did that now I can use? And I think that's going to give players a lot of pride that, hey, I helped contribute to this session tonight.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's as I say, if there's one big plus, it's that, and the fact that they've actually had a lot of time to work on their own individual skills.
Yeah. So some big news came out in the recent weeks about New Zealand that you're head coach of, and Australia, where you call home now, that getting the bid and co-host the World Cup for 2023. I mean, that's massive news. I mean, it came out in the middle of the night for you guys. Yeah,
it did. It was at 2 o'clock in the morning here, so it was sitting up late, and it was actually quite it was funny. It kind of reminded me when the announcement was getting made about when you're getting ready to play a really important game. You're on the sideline as a coach, and everything is out of your control. The game's about to start. You've done what you can do, and then it's up to the players. And you always have, I don't know about you, but you have that sense of tension, that sense of dread, that sense of the unknown. And when I was listening to the president of FIFA talking, and you're waiting for them to get to the point and make the announcement, and it was really it was really quite stressful. But I like huge announcement down here. Fantastic for the game, fantastic for the country, and fantastic for women's football. So we were absolutely delighted when the announcement got made.
Yeah, I've had some good conversations with some people from Australia in the past week or two, some guests on the show, and some of the neat conversations that I've had that, really hit home with me is, the people in New Zealand, the people in Australia, that how good the women's programs have come around the last few years. You guys have all had to wake up 2, 3, 4 in the morning to watch, World Cup football now. The locals can get to watch it when in the daylight, and I think it'll really be good for them to experience football at a time, a waking hour time.
Yeah. I mean, it is always a challenge. I still find it a challenge now when I'm trying to watch games in the US and I'm trying to watch games in Europe, and you're getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and and somebody like me who's a professional sleeper, it's not that easy to do, let me tell you. So yeah, it'll be great to have it down here, and it'll just be great for the people here to see all the best players in the world come into town and to actually understand how big an event it is. One of the things with Australia and New Zealand and the US is the same, is that we are countries that have multiple sports. You have your American football, and your baseball, and your basketball. We have rugby league, rugby union, Aussie rules, other different sports. And sometimes our soccer, there's not an understanding of how big the game is. But I think, in global sports, I think this is about the third biggest global sporting event in the world, outside of the Olympics and the Men's World Cup. So I think it will be a real eye-opener for people in the country, particularly those who are not soccer followers.
Yeah, just to build up, you guys got a good 3 years, and I think that's the great part, that you have a good 3 years, and New Zealand and Australia have that prep time to get ready, and I'm sure you guys are just waiting to get out there and start building the program. But I mean, you look at from 3 years from now, you have 18-year-old women, that'll be into their 20s. So it's a long time from seeing what kind of roster you have. But I'm sure it takes a lot of impact on those youth players that are 15, 16, saying, hey, I might have a shot at this World Cup team in a couple of years.
Big time. For the elite young footballers, it's such a huge incentive. So it's a huge incentive for them individually, and it's a huge incentive for our two countries to make sure that we actually put good programs in place, so that we get some of these, outliers or like bolters who will suddenly, who are maybe not even on our radar at the moment, but suddenly in a year or 2 years or 3 years time, there's suddenly this player that's come into the team, and that, that's a great challenge for us to make sure that we now don't just sort of sit back and say, right, we've got the World Cup. It's basically, we've got the World Cup. We're now into day 6 or day 7. And we need to start putting things in place as quickly as possible.
No, I mean, you guys, had some very tight games in last summer's World Cup. You have a lot of positive pieces. I mean, a player that really comes out that having a really good tournament in the NWSL is, Abby Erceg. I mean, you got a center back that can do pretty much everything, and then she goes and scores a goal off a header, in a game the other day. So, I mean, just like how important it is to build around some of the important pieces you have.
No, she's a critical. I made sure I sent her a text straight away and said, don't use up all your goals with North Carolina. Make sure you keep a couple for the fans. So, the good thing we've got in New Zealand is that we've got some phenomenal senior professionals. And I'm not just talking about as a player on the field, I'm talking about as people and as team people. One of the great things about coaching New Zealand is that the players themselves have got such a pride to play for the country, because it's not like there's not a lot of financial incentive for a country like New Zealand for the national team players to represent the country. So they actually really enjoy and have a great sense of that pride in representing the nation. And our senior players are fantastic role models for our young players. So that's one thing that I find that as a coach, it's really, really a positive thing for me to have those kind of players.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot on the show, about some of these smaller nations that get into the World Cup, whether it's the men or women's side, that they bring that grit and hard work. And it's just something about that, being in a small island nation where you have to be so competitive, everything's just so tightly packed in.
Yeah, very much so, and you don't get the things that some of the other bigger nations get. So you're always fighting against things. And again, going back to that earlier thing about players not having things handed to them. It creates an initiative, and it in itself creates a great team environment. So I think often the less you get, the better the environment gets created around the team, because the reasons that they're there of the values that they have are often different than when you're with a team or a group that's like basically handed everything.
Yeah. So I mean, we've seen just how good, like for example, the All Blacks rugby team is one of the best rugby teams in the world, and it's just not that simple equation of, you look at a population, you say, well, it's a numbers game. It's not a numbers game when it comes to certain people and just the way that they carry themselves. I mean, you see a lot in that in Australia too, I'm sure.
Yeah, you do, and I think the All Blacks are a great example of a team who are, in a sense, superstars in New Zealand. They are kings in New Zealand, but they are such a humble culture about how they run the team, and they've been able to sustain that culture over many, many years. And that is probably more important to them than the results they get on the field. And that probably helps create the results that they get on the field as well.
Now, coaching with New Zealand is not a very large country for people here in the United States. It's about the size of Colorado, and you don't have a huge population, so you have a smaller pool to work with. I mean, what are the differences? Because you've coached for the USA, you've coached for Australia, that you have a smaller area to kind of scout and look for players. What has that difference been like?
Well, it's just a challenge that you have to make sure you don't miss a player. That's the key. And that you have to put things in place at younger ages where you're able to identify players when they're younger. Because if you don't do that, then they end up getting lost to the game. So that's the unique challenge that you have in countries like New Zealand, is that you just need to make the best with the talent that you actually have and with the numbers that you have. And then there are further challenges in New Zealand, and just even the geographical location makes it so difficult to give experience to players in international competition. For us to send a young team, for example, to play somewhere is a huge expense. So all those kind of challenges make it a little bit more difficult. But as I say, the good thing of that is that you have a much tighter community. So you have a group of people that are much more cooperative and willing to work together and have the best interests of the players at heart. So in some ways, you have the disadvantages, but the smaller the country you have and the better connection that you generally have, then that helps. That helps in the identification of talent, but it also helps in the way that people work together.
Now, what is a lot of the system like there? Because I'm new to understanding a lot about just the New Zealand youth system. I mean, you have your youth system, then you have your club system there. So I'm just curious how it's all set up there in the country.
It's quite challenging, to be honest. So they have a club system. They have a very small national league, which comprises of eight teams, which are basically the state federation teams, and they have a little senior competition. We obviously have an under-17 and under-20 team, and in Auckland we have what we call a Football Firms Development Programme, which is basically the sort of best of our players from, say, 17 to 19 and 20, and also cater for senior players that might be still back playing in New Zealand. But as I say, the challenge is getting sufficient competition for players domestically to get them to the elite level. So the other, options that we look at are, a lot of our players go to college to sort of pursue their career and also their education there. And we also encourage our players to go overseas and play professionally at as young an age as possible. So, so what we try and do is identify the talent as best we can at a younger age group, and then look at the various ways that we can help develop them as they get a little bit older.
Yeah, I mean, the one big thing that I love about the women's game is the game in the United States, like the university college game is still one of the higher levels that, you're sending a player off to get a college education, but she's playing some of the highest level of soccer in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And going in an environment, so it's a whole package when they go to the US. It's not just about the soccer. It's about going into that environment where they can be sort of taken out of the comfort zone a little bit. The type of competition is very different. It's much more competitive. American players are very, very competitive. So it's a friendly environment, but it's also a very competitive environment. They're staying away from home. So they've got to get used to a whole range of things. So, so one of the benefits for me, for players taking that route, is the fact that football is a part of it, but it's not the only part. It gives them a whole other range of lifestyles and that they need to cope with and deal with, that then help them with the soccer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a former university college coach here in America, and big thing I always got when we bring in, foreign players is that, it's the chances of going full professional, making a great salary. And sadly, in the women's game, the salaries aren't, big time. So, with these women that might not have a long career, at least they're walking out of the U.S. with a college degree and now putting themselves in career positions. Because you and I have seen players in their late 20s that are peak of their game, but they decide to walk away just because they need to pursue a professional career outside of football. Yeah,
they need to actually start making a living. And, and that's kind of one of the challenges when you look at countries like New Zealand and when I had the Australian team, is that at that stage, the players were getting a small amount of money to represent the country, but even back then there wasn't really many professional options as well. So by the time they got to 27, 28, 29, they had to actually think, well, I've had that good bit of my life here playing soccer, traveling the world, but I've now actually got to pay a mortgage and get a job and get a career and move on with my life. I think now, if you look though, the last 3, 4 or 5 years, I think the explosion of professional leagues has opened up far more opportunities than there were even just 6 or 7 years ago. So at least now there are some greater, pathways for players to play professionally and earn a sort of a living wage.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some of the biggest names in Europe now fielding women's teams and women's programs. And to me, it's almost a no-brainer because all the facilities are already there for you. Yeah, it's just basically adding another team and just having different training times.
Yeah. And it gives, I used to have this frustrating argument in Australia when we started the W League, or even before we started the W League in Australia, is that the benefits that women's teams can bring to an overall club are sometimes understated. Just having that connection. So, not only are you having a connection with the other 50% of the human race, but you're also having a different feel around your club, and the female team just brings a different perspectives, if you like, that are really assets to clubs. So, clubs quite often just look at a bottom line and think, well, it's costing us money. But there's so many other benefits that outweigh that having and now people are actually, that you're starting to see teams, the major teams in Europe actually realise this. And being involved, like yourself, women's football for a long time, I've had really frustrating conversations trying to get people to understand the importance of women's football and what it can bring and what unique point of difference our sport has compared to a lot of other sports. And it's an argument now that's beginning to take traction.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. We see the proof in the numbers. I mean, you've had the opportunity to coach, in the women's professional leagues in America, where you had just a women's team that was by itself, and then down in Orlando, you guys had a men's team. Now, what was that experience like? Because you had both a women and men's team.
Fantastic. It was fantastic. I mean, the club in Orlando was a unique club. It was a terrific soccer club, and they really embraced the women's team. The city embraced the women's team. The men's team embraced the women's team, and it was just a whole great connection. And to be honest, they would feel that they've lost half of the team if the women's team went. So I think that's a great example of how it can really be blended, and that both sets of players, male and female teams, actually bring a great balance to an overall club and a great asset to the club in different ways.
So let's do a little rewind, just kind of go back in your career. You know, you had some playing days back in the day. How did you get into coaching, and then how did you get into coaching on the women's side?
That's interesting. Well, I don't know if I fell into coaching, if you like, you know, when I played, and then eventually you get older, and I was always the kind of captain of the team as I got older, and team spokesperson, etc., etc. And then sort of eventually went into player coaching, and it's just probably always worked. Well, probably I'd never wanted to get a proper job. That probably helped. But then I sort of fell into player coaching, and then my coaching career just sort of started from there. And, you know, to be honest, I've never really had any, since I started coaching, which was in the late 80s, I've never had a plan in my life, because I think when you go into coaching, it's such an unpredictable profession. You never know how long you're going to be there, and you never know kind of what jobs are going to crop up for you. So I kind of went in there. I was in the elite development with the men's program in Australia. Then I was in the men's national league coaching in Australia in the early 90s. And then it was about 94, I got the opportunity to go into women's soccer. And to be honest, I would never have dreamt of going into women's soccer. And it was a very, very different landscape back in 94 than it is in 2020. But what had happened is that in 1993, it was announced that women's soccer would become an Olympic sport. And then almost simultaneously, it was announced that Sydney would get the 2000 Olympics. So virtually overnight, women's soccer became an Olympic sport, and as such in Australia became eligible for government funding. So it basically went from this sport where players had to pay to play for the national team. Wow. And they may have played 2 or 3 internationals a year. Yeah, they had to, it was basically, you know, people talk about kitchen table organisations, and that's what it was. It was a real organised, it was separate from the men's federation, and it was a really strong group of women and men that were passionate about the game that kept it alive. And then all of a sudden, it became an Olympic sport and was given $1 million plus a year in funding. So what happened was that they had to put programs in place basically to try and look ahead to 2000. And I was working in the men's elite program at the Australian Institute of Sport at that stage. And they sort of approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in taking on the role. So it was a project that really appealed to me. So it was an actual chance to go in and actually start a whole project and put in place a whole program. And that's what attracted me to women's soccer. You know, I've kind of been fortunate for a lot of my career that I've been able to take jobs that have sort of appealed to me, as opposed to sort of just going along a particular pathway. And this was one of my kind of meanderings. So we had to put in full-time coaches in the different states. We had to put in development programs, start development programs. We had to put a national team program together. And so we basically had a blank canvas that we started with. And there was 3 of us in the office, basically starting the whole, what is now the Matildas program. And at that stage, they weren't called the Matildas. That was one of the things that we actually initiated during that period of time, was getting the name of the team. And that's where we became the Matildas. So that part of the job really appealed to me. And I still look back with great fond memories in starting that off.
Now you've been a part of a couple different teams starting out, like the first ever coach in Orlando. I mean, it takes a lot to start something from the ground up, because it's a lot of the unknowns. You know, so much work to do before you even step on the pitch.
It is, but you know, the great thing you can do is that you get a great chance to put your imprint on something and put your own philosophy and your own beliefs in there, and try to set things up to get them running well. Now, I think, you know, you look at yourself, you look back as a coach of, you know, what you do probably best, or what environment you work best in, you know. And I think, you know, if I look back at myself, I think I work better in environments where I'm trying to build something up, or trying to invent something, or trying to recreate something that might have broken down. And I think I work better in those type of environments. And, you know, and with the Matildas, and obviously with Orlando, those have been two opportunities where I've been able to sort of go in and do that.
No, and I'm sure that, you know, that you're always going to be a fan. I mean, you're the head coach of New Zealand, but there's still part of you that, you know, there's certain clubs and teams that you still have, like, your heart's still with them partly.
Oh, very much so. You know, and I mean, I'm still in contact with a huge number of people in Orlando. I'm still in contact with a huge number of people that were involved with the Matildas and other programs. And I think that's an important thing as well. I think what you want to do is set up you want to create an environment where you don't just finish and walk away and then suddenly shut that out of your life, because ultimately it's also about the people that you work with, because, you know, that's the critical part of the job. And, you know, if you're in an environment where you enjoy working with the people and everybody's pushing in the same direction, and it's not, you know, it's football, sport, soccer, sport in general, it's not a 9-to-5 job.
No.
You know, you're with each other on the field, off the field. There's a different connection with sporting teams as there is as opposed to a 9-to-5 job where you go and you do your job and then everybody goes their own way after it. And you create some unique connections in the sport. And, you know, and if I look back and say, well, what are my fondest memories? They're really not necessarily about the football on the field. It's about the experiences, and it's about the people, and it's about the things that you did together.
No, I've had that conversation with a lot of players and coaches. It necessarily might not be the biggest win you had. It might be some type of training session or something that happened in a hotel when you're traveling, just some goofy thing with the food getting mixed up, and just those stories that you hold on to the rest of your life. Just like with you guys going to the World Cup, all getting together and getting on a plane and going to France. You're going on the other side of the world together.
Yeah. And it is, and particularly with a national team, because when you're together. You're 24/7.
Yeah,
you're there for breakfast, you're there for training, you're there for lunch, you're there for dinner, meetings, you know, a whole thing. So that, you know, having that connection and that closeness is really, really, and that environment where people really want to be there is of critical importance. And, you know, and it's exactly what you say. You know, I'll catch up with guys that I might not have seen for 30 years. And it's like you met them yesterday. And you actually don't often talk about, like you say, the game. You talk about all the various experiences that happen, you know, whether it's your bus breaking down in the middle of nowhere, or leaving somebody behind in the diner after you've had your pre-match meal and you're driving off to the game. You know, so, and those are the unique moments, I think, that sports just brings people together.
Now, I'm very thrilled and happy for you guys that you're hosting a World Cup. Don't know exactly what time of the year they'll have it, because this will be the first ever Women's World Cup in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, we've seen like a World Cup in China, you know, and we've seen, you know, stuff going on in Asia for the Men's World Cup, but we've never seen a Women's World Cup in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, have you guys even chatted about what that might look like at all, day of the year, or, I mean, time of the year? Have that been brought up at all?
I think they're still talking about, you know, that sort of August time, you know, the Northern Hemisphere summer.
Yeah.
So, which in different parts of New Zealand and different parts of Australia could be a wee bit chilly.
Yeah.
Particularly in the south of New Zealand. But, you know, hopefully kickoffs will be sort of worked around that, so that it's not too bad. But in other places, you know, the weather, particularly in Australia, doesn't get too severe in the winter. It's actually quite pleasant to play soccer. So I think that should be okay. And you know, there'll be a multitude of different venues as well for people to play across, and for people to supporters to come and see. So, you know, people will be really able to come and see a lot of both countries, to be honest.
What are some of the stadiums like there in Auckland and that? Because I mean, that's your biggest city in the country of New Zealand.
No, look, the stadiums are good. They're in good condition. Obviously, they play multi-sports in most of the stadiums in New Zealand and in Australia. But the stadiums are up to date. They're pretty new, and they'll be in really good condition for the games.
Well, I'm going to push for that August. I hope that you guys get the August. That's the best time for us coaches that coach in the WPSL to go down, because our season will be over.
Yeah, we'll make sure we do that. It's funny you said, because I've not actually looked at when the dates are exactly, but I think they're around that time. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was joking with my WPSL staff a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, guys, we got to go down to the Women's World Cup. They're like, Charlie, at the middle of our season, the World Cup. I'm like, oh, guess we can't really just leave our team for a month. Because that's the thing, is we
coach them remotely.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we're learning how to do that now. Coaching remotely and meeting. Yeah, I don't know how long I'd maintain my job if I was at the Women's World Cup, because I'm the first one to show up on camera. If the fan camera comes, I'll be on. Like, yeah, coach said he was away for a week or two, and then you're on the TV in the World Cup. Now, if it's in August, I would definitely, have time to plan it out and bring. I would love to bring our teams down too, bring some players down, just because it's such an experience. I think that I push a lot of the players. Even when I was working with Sky Blue a few years ago, pushing players that didn't get picked, maybe have a few days. I'm like, a couple of them drove up to Canada to watch those games, and you were part of that World Cup, and just seeing how big these stadiums are now, selling out every game.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. The game has just gone to such a different level than it has been, and it's gone to a different level on a relatively very short period of time, which is fantastic.
No, I mean, just the conversations I had, up into this World Cup in France about like tickets selling out in moments online, people having to pay all this money for packages, and that's like the best news to my ears as a fan of the women's game, hearing that a game is sold out and people paying hundreds of dollars for tickets.
Yeah, no, it shows the game's arrived. The thing that I use as an example that the game's arrived is when one of the players can have a Twitter war with the president, with Megan Rapinoe. I think that highlights, the game's actually arrived.
Yeah, they have a lot of power, these young women. So, and they're very big positive. Like, you think you talk about how positive they are as role models. We're starting to see that, because you've talked about how the All Blacks are such like superstars in New Zealand, but you're going to start seeing with this Women's World Cup, you're going to start seeing your players, once you guys start making those official, announcements close to the World Cup, these young women are going to be, on a pedestal, and they don't even probably have never really been in that spot in their life.
That's exactly right. They're going to be extremely influential, and that in itself will be the word challenge is not the right word, but that will be an interesting dynamic, because what will be really important is that, and I think female players are phenomenal at this, is that they're great connectors with the community, they're great connectors with young female players, and they're just great connectors with people as a whole. And I think that's going to be really critical as we get closer to the World Cup, and as our New Zealand players and our Australian players become much more visible in the community, is that the messages that they give, the way that they act, is going to be really, really critical, and that could be such an important factor in the development and continuing to strengthen our game, is how those players represent football and represent the countries.
I mean, you've had the pleasure, like I said, to coach in several teams in the U.S. professionally, and I hear these great stories of players that came to USW games back when you were coaching with San Jose and New York Power. These young girls that might have been 15, 16, or even 14 come as a fan, and then years later, they're playing pro with a player that's playing in their late 30s. I mean, that's because you've been around in the game long enough that these young girls that come to games may play for you one day.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly right. You see them come through, and then all of a sudden, they're in your team.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I want to thank you for joining me on World Sports Show tonight. I love everything you're doing down there. I'm very excited for you guys in Australia, New Zealand. I can't wait to get down there and see the World Cup.
Fantastic, Charlie. Well, hopefully we'll be in touch long before then, over many times. And good luck with the season. Hopefully things clear up and you're back out there full on with your soccer team.
It's Charlie Flowe, World Sports Show, and Tom Sermanni. I'm signing off.
You are listening to the World Sports Show on WPPMLP Philadelphia. Soccer-based sports talk covering local, nation, and global soccer. Broadcasting from the Philly Cam studio in Center City, Philadelphia on 106.5 FM.